He began reading at the age of 4. With his index finger, he carefully followed the sentence letter by letter, reading each of them out loud before saying the word itself. Some letters were that beautiful, he had to pause and behold them. His tiny sausage finger left its usual course to follow the fat belly of a capital B or the spiky head of an A. After 4 days, he already knew and loved every letter of the alphabet. Franz was a weird kid. Ever since he was small, he had an unusual sense for aesthetic and order. As soon as he began to speak, he started using words like extraordinary and outrageous. He wouldn't know when to use them, but liked the sound of it. His thin child hair had to be side-parted every night before he went to bed. He sorted his Playmobil neatly into women, men, Indians, cowboys, pigs, and horses, and put each group in a separate labeled box. Every night, Franz's mother combed his hair with loving accuracy according to his wishes. Meanwhile, he stood on his turned potty, following her every move with critical eyes by peeking over the lower rim of the bathroom mirror. She was so delighted by the fact that a tiny person like her son could already show such adult and serious features. So she bought him an outrageous hybrid between a sleeping bag and jammies. And since he was already too proud to still be carried to his bed, he was forced to move in tiny shuffling steps. A pinstripe suit was printed on the fabric, with a matching tie and pocket square. Like an insurance salesman with knotted shoelashes, he shuffled towards his crib, with his side-parted head held up high. When he finally got there, he, as disgraceful as it was, held his arms up so his mother would lift him into his prison. He wasn't yet articulated enough to express his discontent in words, neither was he willing to express it with ridiculously infantine screaming, which conflicted in any form with his inner convictions, so he silently put up with it. Beside the fact that his mother showed him more obvious affection that he was comfortable with, Franz's childhood was an altogether happy one. His parents accepted their peculiar child, even more they found him extraordinarily entertaining and promising. His school grades were above average as expected, and even though he preferred to keep to himself, he cultivated a couple of odd friendships. Not all of them were real. When Franz was 3 years old, his uncle died from a gas explosion in his apartment and left his now mentally disordered and chronically dizzy ferret in his nephew's custody. Franz loved it, without touching it more than necessary. The superintendent of the local public swimming pool was also counted among Franz's unconventional circle of friends. Even though Franz was nauseated by the pure idea of swimming in a public pool or any pool at all, he enjoyed sitting next to the superintendent, who he refused to call anything but Mr. Superintendent, on a tiled bench. With his knees drawn up to his chin, the brink of his bathrobe stretched over his toes, and his hood drawn down to his eyebrows, he watched small children feet toddling by on the tiled floor. He observed the steady breaststrokes of the pensioners gliding past him and philosophized with Mr. Superintendent over life at a public pool. At school, he spent his time in the company of similar, peculiar, and quiet children. Albeit he couldn't really share their enthusiasm for math, chess, or rare bugs, he respected it and felt at ease in the presence of a child well and truly engrossed in a matter. But Franz's true love, combined his passion for the beauty of words and his desire to be alone. He spent hours crouching on the floor, an open book on his crossed legs, with his ferret aimlessly lurching around him. He could scream without raising his voice, run without being hectic, be filthy without getting dirty. All that by reading a story. How amazing would it then be to write one himself, to be the creator of a story he could be part of without actually having to experience it. One thing made him desperate, though. Taking a look at his favorite authors, it seemed like an encyclopedia of sexual predicaments, torn childhoods, and mental diseases. Salinger had to deal with anti-Semitism in Vienna, Möhringer basically grew up in a bar, and Hemingway's father was stuck in depressions while his wife stuck little Ernest in gold stresses. Hesse tried to end his melancholic life at the age of 15, saying, "I want to fade away like the sunset," and Kafka suffered under his father's tyranny. His mother was nearly ridiculously loving. His understanding and generous father had a decent income. They lived in a nice house, in a nice neighborhood, with a nice garden, in one of the safest countries in the world. How on earth was he supposed to ever create at least one meaningful sentence? He knew he wasn't really what one would call a normal child, but being a bit peculiar wouldn't be enough, at least not for the masterpiece he had in mind. He looked at his ferret, staggering towards him. It had lost its hearing in the explosion, and the blast might have blown out of his tiny head the little intellect the Lord grants ferrets. Maybe that was what he needed, an explosion strong enough to hurt him and tragically limit his life abilities, yet allowing him to write. Beethoven had been deaf too, and let's be honest, he couldn't bear most of what anyone had to say anyway. There had to be someone amongst his socially challenged friends being able to help him out with this. Not only did most of them know how to actually cause an explosion, some already did, more than that, none of them would even doubt the logic of his decision. He could virtually see numerous little eyes behind thick round glasses admiring him respectfully for his devotion. But an explosion is a nasty business, and he could end up dead like his uncle, or even worse, lurching, squinting and dumb like his ferret. A depression seemed more accurate for his nature. An artistic, melancholic mind threatening to shatter given the state of the world sounded more like him. He actually came to like the idea. Maybe he could even start to hurt himself superficially, small bloodless scratches adding weight to his despair and helplessness. Oof, if he had put enough planning into it, he might even be able to fade like the sunset. The right calculation of the dosage, his parents finding him in the right moment, and he'd be fine by sunrise. The bathroom mirror helped him find a serious, tormented look. He furrowed his eyebrow and imagined his parents dying, Mr. Superintendent in a car crash, him burying the ferret in the backyard. With all his volition, he tried to push liquid from his lacrimal gland into his squinted eyes. He ran to his father's study and started reading the newspaper. Earthquake in Haiti, famine in Africa, bomb attack in Iraq. Something had to turn on the waterworks. Nothing, not a single drop. The state of the world just wouldn't move him enough. It made him angry, and his forehead hurt from all the furring, and his wide-open eyes, tearless eyes started to run dry. Maybe he could get his parents to detest him, to maltreat him, or even hit him, if he got lucky. He would rather blow himself up with a homemade gas bomb by one of his classmates, but he had to try. To become big, you have to sacrifice big. Franz thought of words he could use to make his mother go off. Cunt, a boy from his class once called their teacher and got detention for a week. Fuck seemed to be another word adults aren't too thrilled about hearing, at least coming from a child's mouth. He would call her a fuck cunt. He would tromp down the stairs, loud and rude, and call his mother, who never did anything but love him, a fuck cunt. That's the plan. Stomping down the stairs was surprisingly easy, though the sound of every step hurt him when he lifted his tiny legs and trudged down stage by stage as loud as he could. His mother stood in the kitchen, already wondering about her son's uncommonly loud appearance. Normally, she wouldn't even know he's in the room before he addressed her with his mousy voice. There he was, with his small clenched fists hanging down at the side of his body, ready to scream the meanest word that he could think of. He should come closer, stand right next to her, so she could hit him once she was furious. He would call her a fuck cunt, she would slap him across his dirty mouth, and voila, a shattered home. Now, he was standing right next to her, smelling the cookie dough she had whipped off her hands onto her flowery apron. He looked up at her, smiling down at him. Fuck cunt, he thought. Say it, fuck cunt. Even better, scream it, fuck cunt. His eyes became bigger, his face got a reddish tone, but he just wouldn't say it. He couldn't. Fuck cunt was an awful word. It didn't only sound awful, it looked awful too. It didn't have a fat-bellied B or a spiky A. It was just ugly, and he wouldn't say it. When Franz went to bed this night, he found a book on his nightstand. The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. A beautiful book bound in dark grey linen. He could feel the golden letters on the cover, follow them with his index finger. It was a beautiful, extraordinary story, told in magical words. Not one sentence hurt him, no word made him shiver. In the middle of the night, when Franz finally rearranged his hair and went to sleep, he reluctantly put the book back on the nightstand. Already half asleep, he read the description of the author on the back of the book. Thomas Mann, as always emphasized how sheltered and happy his childhood had been.